The man sat on a worn-out bench at the edge of a crowded street, staring at the small wallet in his hands. Inside it were just a few crumpled bills, $400 to be exact. It wasn't much. In fact, it was all he had left after months of struggle. He had lost his job a few months earlier, and since then life had been nothing but a storm. Rent piled up, bills collected on the table, and food became something he thought twice about before buying. Day after day he walked around the city with tired steps looking for work, asking for chances, but doors kept closing on him. The city that once felt alive now felt like a heavy weight pressing down on his shoulders. He thought about what to do with the money. $400 could buy him a few weeks of groceries, maybe cover a small portion of the rent he owed, or keep him floating a little longer. But deep inside he knew it would not change much. When the money was gone, he would be right back where he started, staring at empty pockets and wondering what to do next. For days he carried that thought like a stone in his chest. Every night he lay awake on an old couch he borrowed from a friend, staring at the ceiling, trying to plan his way out of the darkness. One morning, as he walked down a side street, he noticed a small paper taped on a light pole. It was an advertisement scribbled in black marker. Old car for sale, $400. Runs but needs work. Call if interested. He stood there for a moment, staring at the paper. His first thought was, I can't waste my last money on something like this. But then another thought came, softer but stronger. What if this is a chance? He shook his head, almost laughing at himself. A chance in a beat-up old car? It didn't make sense. Yet, as he walked away, the words on that paper stuck in his mind. Later that day, he couldn't resist. He called the number. The voice on the other end was rough but kind, and the owner explained that the car was old, sitting in his yard for months, but still moved if someone was willing to take care of it. It's not pretty, the man warned, but it'll get you from one place to another if you treat it right. Something inside him stirred. Maybe it was hope, maybe desperation, maybe both. He agreed to come and see it. When he arrived, the car sat under a tree covered in dust, paint chipped, tires worn down. The seats inside were torn, the smell of rust filled the air. Most people would have turned around, but he didn't. He walked around it, opened the hood, touched the steering wheel. He didn't see just the broken parts. He saw movement, a tool, a way to get from place to place without depending on anyone. He thought about how many job interviews he had missed because buses were late, or how many opportunities slipped away because he didn't have his own ride. Maybe this car wasn't much, but it was something. It was freedom, even if just a small piece of it. The owner looked at him and shrugged. $400 as it is. No less, no more. The man reached into his pocket, pulled out all the money he had, and handed it over. His hands shook as he let go of the bills. This was everything, his last hope, his final gamble. As he slid into the driver's seat and turned the key, the engine coughed, groaned, and finally came to life. It wasn't smooth, it wasn't strong, but it was alive. Just like him. Driving it for the first time was both exciting and terrifying. The car rattled, the brakes squeaked, and the engine sounded like it was complaining with every mile. But with each turn of the wheel, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Control. For the first time in months, he wasn't just walking the streets, waiting for something to change. He was moving. He was going somewhere, even if he didn't know exactly where. He smiled to himself, even laughed a little as the wind hit his face through the cracked window. That night, he parked the car outside the small place where he was staying and sat inside it for a long time. The street was quiet, the lights dim, and all he could hear was the ticking sound of the engine cooling down. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and for the first time in months, he felt like maybe, just maybe, things could get better. It wasn't much. It was just an old car, but it was his. He owned it, he chose it, and no one could take that away. Over the next few days, he spent hours cleaning it. He scrubbed the seats, wiped the dashboard, washed the windows. Each stain he removed felt like he was washing away a little bit of his own pain. While cleaning, he discovered old items left behind. A broken pair of sunglasses, an empty keychain, a crumpled piece of paper with numbers on it, and even a few coins under the seat. They didn't mean much, but they made him wonder about the life of the person who owned it before. Who drove this car? Where did it go? What stories did it carry? He didn't know, but he liked to think it was waiting for him now, waiting for new roads, new stories, new beginnings. The car was far from perfect, but so was he. And maybe that was why it felt right. Every scratch, every dent, every flaw, it mirrored his own life, full of struggles, yet still standing, still moving. He began to look at it not just as a car, but as a partner, a piece of his journey. At night, when sleep was hard to find, he would sit inside the car with the door open, looking at the sky. He thought about the choices that brought him here, about the people who doubted him, about the battles he lost. But he also thought about the tiny spark inside him that refused to die, the spark that told him to take a chance, to risk his last money on something others might laugh at. He realized that sometimes life doesn't give you clear answers or safe options. Sometimes it hands you an old rusty car and asks, "What will you do with it?" As the days passed, he grew more attached to it. He learned how to listen to the sound of the engine, how to feel the wheels on the road, how to tighten a loose screw or patch a small leak. He wasn't a mechanic, but he began teaching himself little by little out of necessity. And with every repair, he gained confidence. The car wasn't just getting stronger, he was too. What he didn't know then was that this decision, this simple, risky step, would soon open doors he could never have imagined. For now, he only knew one thing. He had spent his last $400 on an old car, and though the world might have seen it as foolish, to him, it was the start of something he couldn't yet explain. Deep inside, he felt it. His life was about to change. The days slowly turned into weeks, and the man spent more and more time with his old car. At first, he only wanted it to take him from one place to another, but soon, he began noticing little things about it. The back seat had a tear that revealed something stuffed deep inside the cushion. He pulled it out carefully, expecting maybe an old coin or just trash. Instead, it was a folded paper, yellow with age, almost falling apart at the edges. He opened it and saw a list written in shaky handwriting. There were names, a few dates, and what looked like an address at the very bottom. It didn't make much sense, but something about it made him pause. He slipped it into his pocket, planning to think about it later. A few days after, while cleaning under the driver's seat, he discovered another surprise. A small envelope was tucked so far back it almost blended into the frame of the seat. His hands trembled as he pulled it out. Inside were old photographs. The pictures showed a smiling family standing proudly beside the very same car, only many years younger. The car was shiny back then, the paint fresh, the windows clear. The man studied the faces of the family, a father with strong shoulders, a mother with gentle eyes, two children laughing between them. They looked happy, full of life. He stared at the photos for a long time, his chest tightening with emotions he couldn't explain. Holding those photographs felt strange. It was as if the car itself was whispering stories of its past. He thought about the countless journeys it must have made, the laughter that filled its seats, the roads it had seen. Now here it was, old and worn, carrying him, a stranger with nothing left but hope. He placed the photographs back in the envelope and tucked it safely in the glove box. He didn't know why, but he felt like they belonged there, as though he was guarding a piece of someone else's history. Later that night, he sat in the car thinking about the note and the address. He wondered if he should go there. Maybe it was useless. Maybe it was nothing more than an old memory of the previous owner. But curiosity burned inside him. He had nothing to lose anyway, and maybe the address could lead to something he didn't expect. He promised himself he would drive there soon, once he was sure the car could handle a longer trip. In the meantime, he kept working on the car little by little. He searched for cheap spare parts at junkyards, asked neighbors for tools, and learned tricks by watching how others repaired their vehicles. The more he fixed, the more alive the car became, and the more he worked, the more alive he felt too. It was no longer just about transportation. Every small repair was like proof that he could still do something with his hands, that he wasn't as helpless as he once thought. One afternoon, while trying to patch a leak in the radiator, a neighbor walked by and noticed his effort. The man looked at him and asked if he could take a quick look at his own car that had been making a strange sound. Without much thought, he agreed. He opened the hood, poked around carefully, and within minutes spotted the loose belt causing the noise. It wasn't a big fix, but when the neighbor started the engine again, the noise was gone. The neighbor smiled wide and thanked him, slipping a small bill into his hand. It wasn't much money, but it meant something bigger. For the first time in a long while, he had earned something with his own effort. Word spread quietly. Another person came by asking if he could take a look at their car. Then another. At first he was nervous, unsure if he could really help. But he tried, and each time he managed to fix something. Sometimes it took hours. Sometimes it was quick, but each repair taught him more. Slowly, people began to trust him. They didn't see him as the man who had lost everything. They saw him as someone who could solve problems. That feeling gave him a kind of pride he hadn't felt in years. Still, every night when the streets grew quiet, he thought about the photographs and the note with the address. The image of that happy family haunted him in a gentle way. Who were they? What had happened to them? Why was their car abandoned in a yard, sold for just $400? The unanswered questions stayed in his mind, urging him to find out. Finally, one cool morning, he decided to follow the address written on the old paper. The drive wasn't far, but the entire time his heart raced. The car sputtered and coughed a few times as if protesting, but it kept moving faithfully. When he finally arrived, he found himself in front of a small, quiet house. The paint was peeling, the garden looked forgotten, and the windows were shut. It seemed no one had lived there in a long time. He sat in the car for a while, staring at the house, unsure what to do. Then he noticed something. On the mailbox was the same family name he had seen on the back of one of the photographs. He stepped out, walked slowly to the porch, and knocked gently. There was no answer. He knocked again, this time louder, but still silence. Just as he was about to leave, an elderly neighbor from across the street called out to him, asking who he was looking for. He explained softly that he had bought the car from someone and found these old photos inside. The neighbor's eyes widened. She walked closer and said she remembered the family. They had lived there many years ago, but life had taken a hard turn for them. After the father passed away, the family had moved away, and the house had been empty ever since. The man stood there in silence, holding the envelope tighter. He didn't know what to say. The neighbor smiled sadly and added, that car was their pride. They loved it. They drove it everywhere. Hearing those words gave him a strange comfort. It was as if the car had carried the love of that family for years, and now it had found him when he needed it the most. On his way back, he felt a deep connection with the vehicle. It wasn't just an old machine anymore. It was a piece of history, a piece of someone's life, and now it was part of his too. The car had seen joy and sorrow, beginnings and endings. Now it was carrying him through his own journey of struggle and hope. From that day, every time he sat behind the wheel, he didn't feel alone. He felt like the car itself carried a silent strength, pushing him to keep going. And though he didn't fully understand why, he began to believe that buying it was not just chance, it was meant to be. The man woke up one morning with a different kind of energy. For weeks he had been working on the car, fixing small things, learning as he went. The more he worked, the more confident he became. It wasn't perfect, but it no longer coughed smoke every time it started, and the tires no longer shook like they were about to fall off. It felt steady, reliable, and strangely, it felt like a part of him. He knew it was time to push himself further. The little jobs he had done for neighbors had given him courage. If he could repair one car, why not two? If he could fix small things, why not bigger ones? The thought both scared and excited him. That day, a young man from down the street walked up to him, pointing at his own car. It keeps stalling in the middle of the road, he explained nervously. Do you think you can check it? The man hesitated. This was more serious than tightening a loose belt or replacing a tire. What if he failed? But then he reminded himself. He had already taken a bigger risk when he spent his last $400. This was no different. With a deep breath, he agreed. He opened the hood, studied the engine, and listened carefully as it sputtered. He didn't have formal training, just instinct and the little he had picked up from observation. He tried one thing, then another. Hours passed, sweat running down his face, his hands covered in grease. The young man stood nearby, watching nervously, hoping for a miracle. Finally, the man adjusted a few connections, cleaned out a clogged filter, and told him to try again. The young man turned the key, and the engine roared to life, smoother than it had sounded in months. The relief on his face was priceless. He grinned wide and handed the man a folded bill, insisting he'd take it. It wasn't just about money, it was about trust. The man realized something important that day. People believed in his ability. From then on, his days were filled with cars. Some were small fixes, like replacing spark plugs or tightening bolts. Others were bigger challenges, like repairing brakes or patching leaks. Every job taught him more. Sometimes he failed at first, but he never gave up. He would go back, try again, and eventually figure it out. Each mistake became a lesson, and each success gave him strength. Before long, his small corner became known as the place to go when your car needed help. He didn't even need a sign. Word of mouth was enough. People came not just because he fixed cars, but because he cared. He never overcharged, never turned anyone away, and never treated anyone with arrogance. For him, every car was like his old one, something broken that deserved another chance. In the evenings, when the work was done, he often sat in his own car, the one that started it all. He would look at the photographs of the family that once owned it. Their smiles reminded him of why he kept going. That car had carried them through their journeys, and now it was carrying him through his. Sometimes he even spoke softly to it as if it were a friend. "You saved me," he would whisper, touching the worn steering wheel. It wasn't just a machine. It was proof that hope can live in unexpected places. One day, a woman drove up in an old van that coughed and rattled worse than his own car had when he first bought it. She explained that she couldn't afford a repair shop, and she needed the van to take her children to school. He promised to do his best. For 2 days, he worked tirelessly, replacing broken parts with whatever spares he could find, improvising where he couldn't. When he finally handed the keys back, the van started smoothly. The woman's eyes filled with tears, and she hugged him, thanking him over and over. That moment stayed with him. He realized that fixing cars wasn't just about engines and metal. It was about people, about giving them back a piece of their lives. Slowly, his life began to change. The money he earned wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to cover meals, rent, and even save a little. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't living day by day with fear of tomorrow. He began to dream again. What if he could have his own small garage one day? What if he could turn this unexpected talent into something bigger? These thoughts didn't feel impossible anymore. They felt like goals waiting to be reached. There were still challenges. Sometimes a repair was too complicated and he didn't have the tools. Sometimes he doubted himself, wondering if this was just temporary luck. But every time those doubts crept in, he remembered the day he bought the old car. He remembered how everyone else would have seen it as a waste of money, yet it became his lifeline. If that decision had carried him this far, maybe there was more waiting ahead. One evening, while returning from a small job, he drove past a junkyard. Rows of abandoned cars sat rusting under the setting sun. Something inside him sparked. He parked and walked through the rows, touching the cold metal of forgotten vehicles. Each one told a silent story, just like his car once had. He spoke to the owner, an older man who explained that many of these cars were too damaged for shops to bother with. But they were cheap, sometimes almost free. An idea formed in his mind. If he could bring one old car back to life, why not another? If he could buy them cheap, repair them with patience, and sell them, maybe this could be his way forward. That night, he could barely sleep. The thought of buying abandoned cars and restoring them filled his heart with both fear and excitement. It was a risk, just like the first time, but he knew risks sometimes held the seeds of transformation. He promised himself that when he had saved enough from repairs, he would try. In the meantime, he continued helping anyone who came his way. He never turned down a job, no matter how small. People respected that. They began bringing not only their own cars, but also telling friends and family. His name spread quietly through the community. Not because he had a big shop or fancy tools, but because he had honesty, patience, and a willingness to help. And for him, that was more valuable than any advertisement. On quiet nights, he thought about how far he had come. Just a few months ago, he was sitting on a bench with only $400 left, feeling hopeless. Today, he wasn't rich, but he had purpose. He had dignity. He had a skill that kept him moving forward. Most importantly, he had hope. And it all started with a choice that seemed foolish at the time, spending his last money on an old car. Looking at the car now, shining a little more after every wash, he realized it wasn't just a vehicle. It was a symbol of second chances. What he didn't know was that this was only the beginning. The small spark that started with one car was about to grow into something much bigger. Something that would transform his life in ways he couldn't even imagine. But for now, he was content, sitting in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, smiling as the engine hummed softly. For the first time in a long time, the road ahead didn't feel like a dead end. It felt wide open, waiting for him to drive forward. The man's days no longer felt empty the way they once did. Morning used to mean nothing but another stretch of hopeless hours. But now, morning meant work. Morning meant another chance to prove to himself that he could keep moving forward. Every time he woke up, he thought about the cars waiting for him, about the people who trusted him, about the small but steady hope he was building with his own 2 hands. His old car sat outside like a loyal friend, and every time he looked at it, he remembered the moment he took the biggest risk of his life. That rusted vehicle had given him more than transportation. It had given him a path. Still, he knew he couldn't stop here. Something inside him kept whispering that he was meant to do more. Fixing cars for neighbors was good, but what if he could do something bigger? What if this small skill could turn into a life-changing journey? One afternoon, while he was helping an older man repair a truck, he overheard 2 mechanics talking nearby. They were complaining about how some cars weren't worth fixing, how they just sent them to the junkyard because no shop wanted to waste time on them. The words stuck in his head. Not worth fixing. He thought about those rows of abandoned cars he had seen at the junkyard sitting there under the sun, forgotten. He thought about how people had probably said the same about his own car. And yet look what had happened. He had turned not worth fixing into the very thing that saved him. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept picturing the junkyard, all those broken cars waiting for someone to see value in them. He remembered the idea he had before about buying one, fixing it, and selling it. At first, the thought scared him. What if he failed? What if he wasted money he didn't have? But then another thought pushed back. What if it worked? What if this was the step that could truly change his future? The next morning, with his savings clutched tightly in his pocket, he walked to the junkyard. The owner greeted him with a curious look, surprised to see him again. "Back so soon?" the owner asked with a small smile. The man explained that he wanted to buy one of the old cars. The owner laughed softly. Most people come here to throw things away, not to take them. But when the man insisted, he showed him around. Row after row, they passed cars with broken windows, flat tires, and rusted doors. Finally, one caught his eye. It was an old sedan, its paint faded, one headlight missing, but something about it called to him. He walked around it slowly, touching the metal gently, the way he had touched his own car the first day. He could see past the dents and scratches. He could almost see it shining again, running on the road with life. He asked the price. The owner shrugged. "It's yours for cheap if you really want it, nobody else will." He handed over the money and arranged for it to be towed back. As he watched the car being pulled into his small corner of the street, he felt both nervous and excited. This was it, the beginning of something new. He rolled up his sleeves and began working. The repair wasn't easy. Days turned into weeks. The car fought him at every step. Parts were missing, the engine groaned, and there were moments he almost gave up. But every time he felt the urge to stop, he remembered how far he had come. He remembered the nights he had gone to bed hungry, the mornings he had woken up with nothing. Compared to that, this challenge was nothing. He pushed on, one bolt at a time, one fix at a time. Neighbors watched him with curiosity. Some doubted him, whispering that it was impossible. Others encouraged him, offering tools, advice, even a little food to keep him going. Slowly, the car began to change. The rust faded under fresh paint. The engine, once lifeless, began to hum. Bit by bit, the car came back to life. The day it finally started, the sound of the engine filled the street like music. Children ran out to cheer and neighbors clapped. The man stood there, his hands trembling, his heart racing. He had done it. He had taken something broken and given it another chance. Not long after, he sold the car for a profit. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was enough to prove something important. He could do this. He could buy old cars, restore them, and sell them. He could turn his struggle into a business. For the first time in his life, he didn't just feel like he was surviving. He felt like he was building. Soon, one car turned into two. Two turned into three. Each project was different, each one teaching him new skills, new lessons. Some were easy, some tested his patience, but every finished car brought him closer to a dream he never thought he'd have. People began to notice. They saw not just a man fixing cars, but a man rebuilding lives, his own, and in some ways theirs too. One evening, a man pulled up in a sleek car that had broken down on the road. He had heard about the street mechanic who could fix anything. The man laughed at the title but accepted the challenge. Hours later, when the car purred again, the owner was so impressed he told his friends. And just like that, word spread even further. More cars came, more opportunities appeared, but through it all he never forgot where it started. Every night after the tools were put away, he sat in his old car, the very first one, the one that had cost him his last $400. He would run his hand along the steering wheel, close his eyes and whisper, "Thank you." That car was his reminder that sometimes the biggest changes come from the smallest, most uncertain steps. One day, as he worked on another project, he realized something had shifted. He wasn't just fixing cars anymore. He was building a life. The man who once had nothing was now surrounded by engines, tools, and people who respected him. The man who once doubted himself now believed in his own hands. The man who once feared tomorrow now looked forward to it. The old car outside seemed to smile at him, as though it knew all along. And deep down he knew this was only the beginning. Bigger things were waiting. His journey, born from desperation, was transforming into something he never thought possible. He was no longer just repairing cars. He was repairing himself piece by piece until he too was whole again. Years passed, but the man never forgot the day he had handed over his last $400 for that old car. At the time, it felt like madness. People would have laughed if they knew. They would have said he was wasting his last chance on a pile of rust. But now, as he stood in front of a busy auto shop that carried his name, he knew that single choice had changed everything. What had started as fixing one car on the side of the street had grown into something far bigger than he ever imagined. His small corner had turned into a workshop. His workshop had turned into a proper garage. And his garage had become a trusted place for people from all over town. Customers came not just for repairs, but for honesty, for kindness, and for the care he put into every job. The smell of oil and metal no longer reminded him of struggle. Instead, it reminded him of growth, of learning, of second chances. The sound of engines starting up smoothly wasn't just noise anymore. It was music, the soundtrack of his new life. Each day he walked into his shop with pride, not because it was grand or fancy, but because it was built with his own hands piece by piece, job by job. The old car that had started it all still sat in a corner of the shop. He refused to sell it no matter how many offers came his way. It wasn't just a car anymore. It was a symbol. Its rust had been cleaned, its dents straightened, but he kept some scars visible on purpose. They reminded him of the journey, of the nights he sat inside wondering if he had made a mistake, of the days he fought to keep moving forward. To him, that car was living proof that broken things could still shine if someone believed in them. One afternoon, 3 children came by the shop chasing a ball that rolled across the lot. They stopped wide-eyed, staring at the old car in the corner. One of them asked if it still worked. The man smiled, walked over, and turned the key. The engine rumbled to life, steady and strong. The children gasped, their faces lighting up with excitement. He laughed softly, remembering how it once coughed and sputtered like it was on its last breath. Now it was alive, just like he was. Moments like that filled him with quiet joy. He realized he wasn't just fixing cars, he was inspiring people. Neighbors would tell him, "If you could turn your life around, so can we." Young boys and girls came to watch him work, asking questions, learning little tricks. He welcomed them, showing them how to tighten a bolt or change a tire. He wanted them to know that skills could be learned, that nothing was impossible if you were willing to try. His story spread beyond the neighborhood. A local paper once wrote about him, calling him the man who built a life out of broken cars. At first, he was embarrassed by the attention, but then he realized the truth in it. His life was built out of broken pieces, but that was what made it strong. Even as success grew, he never forgot the hard days. He never forgot the nights he slept hungry, the mornings he doubted himself, the times when the world seemed to turn its back on him. Those memories kept him humble. They reminded him never to look down on anyone, no matter how low they had fallen. Instead, he tried to lift others up the way life had lifted him. One winter evening, a young man came into the shop, shivering in worn clothes. He asked shyly if he could work there, even for little pay, just to learn. The man looked at him and saw his younger self, tired, uncertain, but carrying a spark. Without hesitation, he gave him a chance. He taught him slowly, patiently, the same way he had taught himself years ago. Watching the young man grow gave him a deep satisfaction. It felt like the story had come full circle. At night, when the shop was quiet and the tools were put away, he often sat inside his old car and let his mind wander. He thought about the family and the photographs he had found all those years ago. He wondered where they were now, if they ever knew what their car had become, if they ever imagined it would change the life of a stranger. He wished he could tell them that their car had not been wasted, that it had been the beginning of something beautiful. Sometimes he held those photographs in his hands, looking at their smiles, and felt a strange connection, as if they were watching over him. In a way, they had unknowingly passed their hope on to him, and he had carried it forward. That thought comforted him deeply. The journey had not been easy. There were still days when things went wrong, cars that refused to start, bills that piled up, moments of doubt. But now he had the strength to face them. He had built a foundation, one that no storm could take away. His shop wasn't just a business. It was a symbol of resilience, of what happens when you refuse to give up. Looking back, he realized that the best decision of his life was the one that made no sense at the time. Spending his last money on that old car had looked like failure from the outside, but in reality it was the seed of his future. That car didn't just carry him down roads, it carried him out of despair, out of hopelessness into a life of purpose. Now, when people asked him how he did it, he would smile and say, "Sometimes the road to your future doesn't look like a road at all. Sometimes it looks like an old broken car. Don't be afraid to take the chance." His words carried weight because they weren't just advice, they were lived truth. As the sun set one evening, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, he stood outside his shop, wiping grease from his hands. Cars were parked neatly in the lot, each one a story, each one a piece of his journey. The sound of laughter from a nearby family echoed through the air, mixing with the faint hum of engines. He looked at his old car one more time, its headlights catching the light of the setting sun, and felt his chest swell with gratitude. He had once been a man with nothing left but $400 and a dream that didn't even make sense. Now he was a man with purpose, with dignity, with a life rebuilt from the ground up. And it all started with a broken car that no one else wanted. A car that taught him the most important lesson of all. Sometimes, the things the world calls worthless are the very things that can change your life forever.